First off, everyone needs to listen to your podcast. I think you guys are probably my most favorite industry podcast out there because you guys really teach actors how to actually be entrepreneurs, how to actually market themselves. So I also do feel like every actor should think of themselves as a business person.
Hello, friends and family, and welcome to today's episode of Creative Risk, where I have the wonderful Mike Ruckles. Mike Ruckles is a renowned vocal technician and singing voice specialist based in New York City. He works with Tony, Grammy, and Oscar-winning performers, including me, who's won none of those. And his clients appear in leading roles on Broadway, the West End, and beyond. His approach blends cutting-edge vocal pedagogy with deep industry insight, thanks to his close collaborations with top medical professionals, composers, and casting directors. Mike has served as a production vocal coach on Broadway and for film and TV projects like Lyle Lyle Crocodile, Jessica Jones, and Little Voice. He's sought after clinician and a master teacher with the National Association of Teachers of Singing. Mike's expertise is shaping the next generation of performers, both in the studio and on stage. And it's true. From personal experience, I love Mike. And this episode is not about just telling you to go work with Mike Ruckles. That was not the point of having him on. It was just to talk about that sustainability piece of building the contemporary, essentially competitive Broadway singer in particular, but really just a vocal specialist all around. I think Mike's just great. I really loved the conversation. We can get into all kinds of things. Yes, about the voice, but also just the industry and its expectations. And he's such a sweet guy who's doing so much good for so many of us. So enjoy. And while I do want to primarily talk about training the modern Broadway voice in specific, I also just want to talk a little bit about you, where it all began for you, and when you realized that you had the skill of teaching, because it is a unique skill,
Sure.
and when did that become the primary focus for you?
Yeah. So, what I would say is that I was obsessed with the human voice in just about every genre as a young kid. I would go to the public library and, remember when you would check out like tape cassettes and
Yes.
and I would be listening to cast recordings of things that were way above my head as a kid, things that make me laugh now as I think back on like which shows I was listening to and thought that I understood. I was listening to Judy at Carnegie Hall. I was listening to opera singers. I was listening to everything and kind of just randomly, right? And so I was just really obsessed with the human voice. And then I think my parents started to introduce me to movie musicals, and that I think it was just kind of random. I kind of just got into it, and so thus began my love of musicals in general. Was always singing, but then around the age of 6 or 8, my parents started me on piano, and I took off with that. And so these two loves of like piano and voice were always sort of developing side by side. I never had one-on-one voice lessons until I went to college. So I really wish I had, but where we lived there in Colorado, there was not a wealth of great, training and places to go. So, that was really how it began, was just with that love. And of course, when I went to college, it was vocal performance. So it was all about classical singing, which funny, again, totally naively, I don't think I really understood that when I went in. I was sort of like, I had to prep these Italian arias. And I think I sort of thought that vocal performance was going to be like all kinds of music. But then, of course, it is fully classical. And I was happy enough to do that. But I was always looking sidewise at the music theater majors and going, how are they making those sounds? I'm interested in that, right? How are they doing that? Is that healthy? Is that something that people should be doing? I was hearing sounds made very well and sounds being made very poorly and, all over the map. So, that was sort of how my love of the voice began. And then I would say, I knew very early, I sort of have had a very backwards career as a voice teacher, because most voice teachers have had this extensive performing career first.
Yes.
And then they eventually retire into academia. you know,
Yes, yes.
at some point. And I was just quite the opposite, where I did have a performing career, but predominantly this, I was graduating from my undergrad, and this position opened up in the music theater department, not for a voice teacher, but for a music director.
And where was
And
this? Wait, sir,
this
where
was
was
at
this
the
one?
University of Northern Colorado,
Uh-huh, yes,
which
yes,
is
yes.
about an hour north of Denver. And they sort of weirdly crafted, I think because they knew, hey, look, we got this young kid who kind of, we can get him cheap and we can craft this whole, you know, gig around him. And so they sort of created this job for me because they had just lost their MD. And so I felt very fortunate to be in on the ground floor like that, with a steady university job. And I was there, you know, just gotten married 2002. And I was there for 8 years. I taught there for 8 years. I was the music director for 3 or 4 of those years. And then around year 2, one of the music theater majors came to me and said, you know, you have this vocal background, and my gut tells me that you know more about singing than my voice teacher. And I remember that was the words he used. And I was very honored by that. And he said, would you consider trying to train me? And I said, you know, let's give it a shot. Let's try. And so we would meet once a week, and to my surprise, it went very, very well. And I was seeing great progress with him. And then gradually I started teaching more and more of the music theater majors, just kind of like under the radar. And eventually my job at the University of Northern Colorado just completely flip-flopped from being the music director to being the one of the music theater voice faculty. And then I had that fortunate thing where a lot of people, when you're working at a university, if you so choose, you can take credits for free, right? So I was working on my master's alongside all of this. I was, you know, it was, now I look back on it and I go, how was I doing, like, family, teaching full time, also taking classes? It was kind of nuts. But I did a master's in something like 3 to 4 years, so I took
Crazy.
my time. But all that's leading up to the fact that once I had my master's, I was still there and they weren't paying me anymore. You know, there was a hiring freeze on. And I remember I decided to do that bold thing where you go to your boss and you sit down in front of them and you go, listen, I know my worth here. And I said, if you are not going to make me a tenure track position, I've been here for 8 years, I have my master's now. If you're not going to do that, then I move into New York City. And it was just sort of what do we call it? It's early morning. I haven't had my caffeine.
I was going to say a mitzvah, but I don't think that's what you were going to say. Is that
well, it ended up being one. It ended up being one. But anyway, he looked at me, and I will never forget. He just looked at me. He's like, "You would do so well in New York City."
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, "All right, all right." And I remember I went home and I was like, honey, I guess we're moving to New York City. And we'd talked about it over the years because it just seemed weirdly like an inevitability at some point. But when we had first gotten married and when I'd started at UNC, 9/11 had just happened, and everybody was sort of like, what's going to happen? You know, what is Broadway? What's happening, right? So boldly, we just picked up and moved across the country, you know, and gosh, I don't think I would have the guts to do it now, but we did. And we loaded up our U-Haul and our dog, and we moved to 190th in Fort Washington in 2010.
I love that location.
Yeah, me too.
Now, why? But why don't you think you would have the courage now? Is it because you have a family and there's a little more like, I wouldn't take that risk? What is it?
That's probably it. I think it's when you're in your 20s, you're also far more. I just think you're just less risk averse, right?
Yeah.
You just sort of go like, well, what do I have to lose? I'm invincible. And it was just the two of us. So it felt like if we go and this is not a good fit, then we do something else.
Because wait, where are you from originally?
Colorado.
Okay, so that was home.
Yeah, so that was what we knew.
So Mike, okay, well then if you can, as humbly as you choose to, although I'm here for it all, you know, you are one of the preeminent teachers in New York City.
Thank you.
You know, when people talk about the best, the quote unquote, who do I have to, who are the best teachers in town? It's the same handful of names, and
Oh,
Mike Ruckles is always there. And I think that. I think the power of your work, and for those listening, like I've worked with Mike. I love working with Mike. Always that's uh, same
and for
thing comes
those
out of my
listening,
mouth.
I love working with Joshua.
Thank you. But what is that, Mike? Because that is we all know New York, saturated competitive market
Mhm.
across the board for creatives. And I would argue especially for teachers to
Mhm.
earn that trust and that base. What do you think that is? I mean, obviously it's because you're great, but is there more to it? What is that, Mike, that has pushed you forward?
That's a great question. I've always attributed it to my gorgeous face, but yeah. Why are you laughing, Joshua? What? Uh, but I would say, I think it comes down to two things. I think it comes down to um, the work being functional training. When it comes to voice training, I had many, many teachers who were what we would call aesthetic teachers. They were, everybody leaving their studio sounded like XYZ, right? You were channeled into a sound, you were shoehorned, you were, if you didn't sound like this, it wasn't right. There was an aesthetic bias. And even in music theater, we find a lot of training and teachers who are like, no, that's not what a pop belt is. It sounds like this. And oh, wait, no, Elsa or Elphaba, they have to sound like this, right?
Right.
We see a lot of that. Um, and on the other hand, we have functional training, which says any sound that you, the performer, wish to make, if it can be done sustainably, I'm here for it, right? And what does that look like? Internally, biomechanistically, what does that look like? Do we understand, as long as you don't have to understand it as the performer, but as long as I understand the sound you're making from a mechanistic standpoint, I understand that it's being done healthfully, that it's being done sustainably, that it's something that is replicatable 8 times a week, then I'm here for it, right? If it's the sound that you, the artist, want to make. So I think a lot of singers have found that very freeing, that that they are freed to make the sounds that are intuitively them, right? Not the sounds, and this is something that's a big ongoing conversation in music theater, because having taught at the BFA program level for so many years, a lot of the conversations revolve around what is the sound the casting director is looking for, what is the sound the agents want to hear at your senior showcase, and you have to give them on a silver platter this thing that is, oh, it's a young Gavin Creel, oh, it's a young this, oh, it's and so therefore all of our training at the BFA program level, and I think it's changing, I'm happy to say I think it's changing, but a lot of our training at the BFA level has just been, how do we hand them on a silver platter exactly who you are in a way that is palatable to them, that feels instantly, oh, great, I can market them in the following ways. Now, of course, that is important, but we don't want to lose who you are inside of all of that, right?
100%. And I want to talk more about these industry expectations, because you are hearing more culturally. It's getting into people's minds that there's one sound and one way to do things. So let's break this down a little bit more. I want to talk about functional training specifically versus just stylistic coaching.
Great.
What is the difference, and why does it matter?
Well, you don't have to go far. You can go onto TikTok and immediately up will spring, if you're looking at voice training, up will spring lots of videos of very good singers who are teachers themselves, and they are, recording lessons, they're recording sessions with singers, and basically what it's amounting to is, let me sing it, now you do that. Right. And I don't even think the intention is you have to sound like me, but that is really what ends up happening, right? Is that there is, even deeper to that, there's a lack of understanding for many of these teachers of, even if the singer makes a sound that they go, ooh, that is it. That's what I was after. That's what I wanted to hear from you. It is possible to make I'll call it a great sound that's an unhealthy sound or not well produced. It's possible to make a sound that casting, listen, I love to listen to Patti LuPone's original Broadway cast recording of Evita, right? I grew up on that and I love it. If I were her teacher at that moment in time, I would have probably had a lot of things to say, right? So it is possible to make sounds that are incredibly exciting, but that may not be sustainable or see that person through the long run, right? And so that's something we want to avoid as well. I do believe that there's a way to make whatever sound it is that you're after. But I think if we go on TikTok, we go on YouTube or Instagram, we can see a lot of now me, now you.
Yeah.
And that is sort of leading into this idea that there is a sound, there is, and furthermore, a lack of understanding on the part of the teacher. Again, I'm not a person who believes that the student and the artist needs to have every bit of information downloaded into their brain. For many of them, that's not a great idea. I have many students who want to know all the ins and outs and all the nitty gritty mechanistically, but for most people, that's too much information.
Well, Mike, I just want to really lift this up and say, well, first of all, in Patty's memoir, she talks about there was an ensemble member who I think took her to the side in Evita and was like, was it you? I'm just kidding.
It wasn't. I wish it had been me. But I wish it had been me. I'm literally looking at my copy of her her biography right here. That's hilarious.
So you know what I'm talking about? She's like, some guy was started telling me that I wasn't singing correctly. I also just want to say, Mike, if I may, and I'm a little careful when I say this because I'm so grateful for everybody who's worked with me in some regard, but I probably even told you this when we started working together. As someone who has also dabbled in all of the names that we're talking about, sometimes there's instances where I'll find myself making a great sound, but I'm like, okay, but wait, what did that do? I don't even know what I did. Or it's in some instances so scientific to the point where I'm like, okay, my brain can't comprehend what to do. And what I found when we were even playing ball was, you have this phrase, you would say, well, what Joshua's voice needs. And actually, Mike, in communicating that way, it felt like you were curious about what my voice needed. And subsequently, I'm not to make this about me and our time working, on pieces, but even when we were looking at Beetlejuice, I remember, you probably don't remember this now, but you're helping me find an accessibility to what was kind of making me a bit nervous. We went via a disc jockey. I remember you were like, let's just explore that. And it was something that I understood, and that you, as you're saying, understood, well, okay, I can hear him making a healthy sound and he can recreate that. So I'm just lifting that up. But I want to talk about how, though, you then blend that, the scientific technique, the nerd part of you, I mean that in a good way, that loves the human voice, with the art of it all. Meeting someone like me who might approach it very differently because of my own background. How do you blend those two?
It's a great question. I think in a first session, and sometimes it takes a couple sessions to really get a read on somebody, but I'm doing a lot of computing in the back of my mind that now feels very intuitive to me. It's not something I'm even really aware of, but I'm taking stock of the person in front of me, the artist in front of me. What are their attractor states, both vocally? Where does their voice gravitate if left to its own devices? And those can be very good habits, right? Some of those attractor states are hopefully very good ones. And then the reason that they're in front of you is that there's probably a couple of not so helpful attractor states for their voice. Right. But I'm also taking stock of their neural attractor states. Are they, and personality attractor states, are they visual learners? Are they kinesthetic learners? Are they interested? Do they light up with the kinesthetic, or the biomechanistic information, or do they light up with imagery and or from, which is true for most of our music theater colleagues, the thing that primarily lights them up is something that's character driven. right?
Mm.
A verb, a character, a need, a want, right? And so I think that was the other thing that came to mind, is that all of my training, particularly, I mean, even for my pop rock folks and certainly for my opera people, is through the lens not of sound making, but of acting, really keeping the actor in the front seat, no matter who you are. What is the verb you're playing? Not so much what is the sound that you want to make. There's a time and a place for, okay, the producer on this record wants this sound here. How do we make that sound? Okay, sure, I'll play ball. But 99% of the time, I'm going to be asking you, what is the verb that we're playing? What is the character want? And how does that show up? Before we put it on pitch, how does that just show up in Joshua's voice, right?
Well, I mean, this is obvious to say this to you, but that is literally the mark of a great teacher, Mike. Meaning,
Mm.
everybody learns differently. That's essentially what you're also getting at, is that
Yeah.
everybody learns differently, and
Mm-hmm.
how do you stay present with the individual enough to help them essentially progress? And
Yeah.
it seems like 101, but it's not, because
No.
again, not to shade anybody else, but in instances it felt in some ways like it was more about, well, this is my process, this is how I do it, and less so about, well, what's standing in front of me. Um,
Right.
can't be taken for granted.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a way in which I think a good voice teacher or acting teacher or any kind of teacher becomes
Yeah.
something of a chameleon in the way in which they go, let me meet you where you are. Let me meet you where you are, not where I am. Right. And that's what you're saying. And I have observed and heard many lessons where this is the way we go about this task. No, do it again. No, do it again. No, do it again. And then the teacher becomes quite frustrated when they're not getting the response they want because they have only one tool in their toolbox to get at that, right? And then, I was in that position as a student. I would leave lessons going, well, it's me. I'm not good enough. I mean, I'm not a good enough singer to understand or do what they want me to do. When in fact, it was just a matter of, well, no, they didn't have the tools to really help me personally. Right.
Wow.
So, but the student, it's amazing, even with my 40, 50-year olds and, people who are well established in the industry, it's amazing at how quickly they will take the blame upon themselves as students and go, oh, it's me. It's me. It's almost never the student. When frustration arises, is the teacher meeting them where they're at? That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the industry trends for a minute, because
Mm-hmm.
um, obviously, I mean, the world's constantly changing, and as musical theater's become a more of a global market in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways, I would argue in some ways that long gone are, the Dorothy Loudon singing 50%, or even the Raul Julias and Nine,
Yep.
who had, sometimes what I refer to personally as like a sexy quality, because to their voice, because it was so unique and so in the world of the story, which
Yeah.
I'm not putting myself down. I think I have a nice instrument, but that's where I love to live, So
Yeah.
how have expectations, because Jennifer Simard ruined it for us all. She's so remarkable. She's so
Yeah.
funny. But how have expectations for singers in musical theater shifted from your perspective in the last even 5 to 10 years or more?
I think we're, trending. I think I have observed, maybe I'm optimistic. I have observed that in the heart of, I would say the late 90s to early 2000s, there was a really strong movement towards a homogenized sound. And nobody would have said that out loud. Nobody would have said,
Sure.
we want a homogenized sound. But you began to see, you know, um, a, sort of a Broadway quality that was emerging. And it was particularly predominant at the BFA level. And, all the women come out sounding like Sutton Foster. All the men are aiming to sound like Gavin Creel. And, I saw it very strongly trending in that direction for a long time. And, there were people like bringing it back to Patti LuPone. I was working on my thesis on belting. And she and I were connected, and I asked her the question at that time. It was probably 19, just like the turn of the century, 2000, right? And it's right around then. And I asked her, do you think that there's sort of a homogenized sound evolving on Broadway? And I recall her specific answer was, yes, isn't it boring as shit? I think was her answer. And I think that sounds like her, if I recall her exact words, right?
Exactly.
And I think now I think I'm seeing in the last 5 to 10 years much more interest evolving again in interesting voices that we instantly recognize. I know immediately who that is, right?
Sure.
I think of what's on Broadway currently. Brody Grant, who's starring in The Outsiders, you immediately hear that voice and you go, that's only one person.
Sure.
That could only be one person, right? And so the Dorothy Loudons, all of what made, the amazing artists who, you think of, there will never be another Bernadette Peters, right? And the minute she sings a measure, you go, I know exactly who that is, right? And I think we were sadly really doing our best to train that out of people. We were doing our very best to make every voice homogenized. And I will say, I think it was with good intent. I think part of that was that there is a world in which I think we can say that if we want to have the ultimate longevity and we want to be able to do 8 shows a week, there are certain attractor states for the voice that are going to be more helpful than others, right? If my voice is really husky, if my voice is, famously, as much as I am the president of her fan club, Bernadette Peters through her entire career has been, dogged by vocal difficulties. And so often we do find that the more unique and the more unusual a voice, the more challenges it may have, right? So I think there was a purpose to trying to push everybody into a box. There was the goal of, we want everybody to be fully sustainable 8 shows a week. But I think we're starting to understand now that it doesn't have to go as far as it went.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also, you and I might have to be co-presidents of the Bernadette Peters fan club. I definitely have the 98 Annie Get Your Gun right there at the bottom which was my first Broadway show. I literally not only get emotional thinking about her, but, when I just saw Old Friends the other day, just to say, it was funny because she comes out and starts Not a Day Goes By and she cracks. And I had seen her in concert last year. And to be honest, it's funny, it's not like she's in the same vocal shape as she was in 1984. But in Old Friends, that's part of it. And this is for me, it's so present. It's so real. She's not even ever seemingly thrown by it. It's just where she's at.
Exactly.
And it's magical because of it, and affects me in my solar plexus in a wholly different way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is the thrill of it, isn't it? That, you bring us to another great conversation, which is, what is longevity and what is sustainability? Because I find that when I'm talking to a lot of particularly young teachers and, but also, people who are teaching at the BFA level, often the goal can become clouded. I think that their goal can become, I want this person to sound exactly the same way at 70 as they sound today. So therefore, that is my goal for longevity. Well, what's their goal for longevity? I think if you talk to Bjork, her goal for her vocal health is probably very different than Sutton Foster's, is probably very different than, Renee Fleming's. And so really, I'm interested in, what is you, the individual, what is your goal for your voice? And for many, we were having this conversation on a teacher forum recently where someone was pointing out, oh, this R&B singer's voice has not aged well. Okay. Would they say that? That's what I'm interested in. Are they making sounds that fulfill them artistically? If they are making sounds that fulfill them artistically and they're not limited by their voice at the age they're at, I think that's a more interesting conversation, because the
Absolutely.
sounds they're making are soulful. The sounds they're making seem to not be inhibited by vocal dysfunction.
Right.
So, yes, does doing 8 shows a week add a whole new layer of complication and it adds a whole new conversation, really, right? Because if we have to do 8 shows a week, there's a sustainability that has to be present, and depending if you want to do that for decade after decade, that's a different conversation, right? But
100%.
I firmly believe that what vocal longevity and vocal health looks like for an individual can be the goals can be entirely different depending on who you are.
Well, and it's interesting about setting goals in relation to that, because
Mhm.
because what I know, and I'm not trying to be braggadocious here, this is just about goal setting. I know that if I was like, well, I want my career to be driven by my voice, and I want to be singing in the best stages in the world, whatever.
Mhm.
It would take a lot of work, but I believe I could get there. I
Yeah.
believe that I could, if I re-centered my focus, but that's not my goal.
Mhm.
And so then you go, well, how do I, my goal is just to sing Edges of the World and pack it with as much life and also as much health that I can, that allows me to do it sustainably. But that, like you're saying, is going to be very different than I want to go sing opera all over, the globe.
Right.
Is a completely different goal. And I guess I haven't thought too much about that. And I imagine, Mike, I could be wrong, but when you first meet someone, I imagine, while you might talk about it, it's probably you have a innate understanding, working based off of who comes in your door, what their goals likely are to be. Does that feel
Right.
true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's often true. I feel like I'm having those conversations more specifically with my folks who are north of 50 and 60 years old, where then we're talking about, okay, so now we're in a different season of the voice. And, there are some things that will always be true for all voices as we get into our 50s, 60s, and 70s. Doesn't have to mean that the voice declines. I can show you amazing videos of 90-year-olds singing gloriously, and a lot of it has to do with how we upkeep and condition the voice over
Right.
those decades, right? But those are the people that I'm predominantly having the conversations with regarding what are your goals for sustainability? How important is it to you that at the age of 70 you sound almost identical to how you did at 25 when you were, a household name, right? Is
Right.
it incredibly important to you that you sound identical, or are we happy to? I have many artists who are no. And what I love about music theater, I'm often hearing from them, heaven forfend, I want to sound like me today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm not after replicating the past.
Well, I want to go back to styles for a second, because I was recently at my alma mater, School of the Arts in North Carolina, and was working with the seniors, and I went into their musical theater audition class, and so I was
Mm-hmm.
working them a little bit. And one of the guys, so talented, he just graduated a week ago, has a very legit voice, and clearly that's his money. But he's riddled with insecurities, and he comes and he says, I, 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 I don't have the interest in doing the Anne Juliet material. He doesn't have that natural inclination, and he's so worried about it. And for me, going back to this idea of finding his voice, I'm like, Daniel, just do you. Is it enough anymore to just have a legit sound or a rock sound, or is there an expectation for true vocal versatility for Broadway viability today?
Oh my gosh, we're hitting all the exciting conversations for me. These are literally, in the last couple months, the conversations that have sort of been being had consistently on the teacher forums and with the teachers that I work with, the associate teachers in my studio. These are the conversations we're often having. And so we've already discussed what longevity looks like over a career. And now we're getting into the other thing that was very strongly being pushed and still is being pushed strongly at the BFA program, which is that everybody needs to be able to do everything, right? When we were, graduating alums, we were from the BFA program. It was, you have to have your rock pop song, you have to have your legit song, you have to
Right.
have this, you have to have this, and they all have to be fully authentic in each style, right? Are there people who can do that? Sure, sure. I'm fortunate to see a lot of people who are really vocal chameleons, and their voice happily goes in numerous directions and can do all these things. Even with the best of them, the Jesse Muellers, right, who have the luck to do Beautiful one day and then Carousel the next. Could we still identify for that person that they probably still have a wheelhouse? I think so,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think we can identify that Jessie Mueller still has a wheelhouse, even though she's been fortunate to be able to use so many parts of her voice, right? And so I think the key is to, I feel like a lot of these young performers coming into their showcases, particularly, are feeling this burn of, I can't just be me. I have to be the young whoever, right? I have to be giving them a clean version of, you're going to cast me like this, and I'm walking in this person's footsteps, and I'm this for you, right? And also, I can do 3, 4, 5 different styles and do them all fully authentically. And I don't think that's realistic for most people. And we look at careers, and that's not what we see. We see very, very few. I mean, who can you name who is doing that regularly? Like, like a Jessie Mueller, who's really bouncing around to that degree. Most people have, I mean, I would say Kelly O'Hara's had an incredibly extensive career. She's done belty roles like Pajama Game back in the day. She's done Nellie Forbush, which is really more of like a low kind of mezzo-y Mary Martin role. And then she's our preeminent, music theater soprano. So, but even so, we think of Kelly as being a specific thing, right? She can do those things, but I think we all know where her wheelhouse is. So I try to encourage these young artists to really look at careers that have been in process and go, look, nobody's doing this.
Well, you sort of answered the next question I was going to ask you about. How do you help artists then stay focused on their own voice, with those industry pressures?
Yeah. So I think, am I saying that people should not be trying to do all of these styles? No, I mean, particularly with young artists who have not maybe developed the core yet of what they're going to be offering the industry. Maybe they don't yet know, where am I going to land? What is my wheelhouse? We're all over the map. We're looking at everything, and I love when people bring in things to lessons that they go, I would never be cast in this, but I want to see if I can bring myself authentically to this. Great. We're going to learn so much from that exploration, right? I love to explore every direction with a voice. That is so important to me. But just continuing to keep their eyes outward focused on, what does an actual career look like? And how important is it to you that you truly can bounce from Rent one day to Carousel to, because it's probably unrealistic.
Well, it's somewhat separate convo, but very much related to this. I have also seen this trend. When I went to the school, Gerald Friedman, who was Patty's mentor, was actually my mentor, the great Gerald Friedman, who used to talk about it being a trade school and being, churning out actors who do exactly that. And yet we're in this moment when I of individualization, of authenticity, of where specialization, where you went to school actually doesn't even matter. This is the advent of socials has changed a lot of this. The whole game of the who's who. So it's like, how do we let go? Of like the remnants of the past that told us that we have to be a jack of all trades, which might not only work against us literally in just our ability to navigate the industry, but it's not what they're looking for.
Right.
Even it's what we think they are. You specialize in the rehabilitation of injured singers, and of course then subsequently the prevention. I'm just curious what it means to specialize in this, but actually more specifically, I imagine that work in particular is quite an emotional journey for a lot of people.
Yes.
Do you find yourself playing therapist a good deal?
Well, I think I said to somebody in a lesson yesterday that there is always some level of therapist in a voice lesson, but I am quick to say that I really it's very important for me to respect boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not a trained therapist. I have no training in psychology and psychiatry. And so I leave that to the professionals. Sometimes when conversations veer, too far in that direction, I'm quick to say, can I refer you to somebody? Or maybe, given that this is our time together, your money might be best spent, seeking someone else to have these conversations with, right? So that we can attend to the voice. But I want to be respectful of my SLPs and that I don't tread on their toes, my speech therapists, that is. I want to be respectful of ENTs. Voice teachers should not be diagnosing anything. So we all have to stay in our lanes, and staying in my lane is very, very important to me. But that being said, yes, there is no way for anyone, be it an ENT, an SLP, a voice teacher, to work with rehabilitation of singing injury and not confront the emotion that goes with it, right? Because our voices are perhaps one of the most personalized and unique and personal things about us. And so when they are not working in the way that we expect them to work, particularly if that is part of our identity as a performer, it's incredibly deep, right? I see people who are really at the bottom of a hole often. They feel like their future is compromised, and it rarely is, but they feel that it might be, right? They're terrified. And so one of my favorite terms that I took from Dr. Lucian Sulika at Weill Cornell is the decatastrophization of vocal injury. And that's something that's incredibly important, that we decatastrophize these things, because there are so few things truly that happen to the voice that we cannot come back from. The science, the surgery, there are so many things that have expanded enormously in the last 50 years that there are very few vocal events that really we cannot come back from as performers, right? We're talking about the Julie Andrews sort of scenarios,
Right.
where truly there's nothing to be done here, right? And really that comes down to scar tissue. Scar tissue is something that does not vibrate. And scar tissue is something that, when it occurs, is a very difficult thing to work around. It's not impossible even now, but and there's amazing people doing incredible work on that. But that can often be, scar tissue can be a non-negotiable, right? But hemorrhages, vocal fold nodules. When people get a nodule, they think that's it. I'm done, right? No, you're not done.
Got to let it heal
Absolutely
and then
not
work
done.
through it. Yeah.
Yeah, we heal, we work through it. We, worst case, if we want to call them worst case scenarios, we have a surgery that probably has a very good outcome rate. And so, I love working rehabilitatively and collaboratively with SLPs and ENTs, but I want to stress that it's always collaboratively. I'm never going it alone, because that's not my job.
Does that happen? Are you like, hey, Linda Doll, like, just want to talk about so and so we can come up with a plan of action? Is that how that works?
Every day.
Uh-huh.
I'm, in contact with, some of the things I love about my job is in the morning, I'm, communicating with a casting director about somebody. In the afternoon, I'm communicating with, Dr. Pittman and at, Columbia. And there's such a wealth of people. An MD, a director might be reaching out to say, hey, what's possible for this artist, right? It's just such a wonderful, I find myself at the intersection of such a wonderful group of people, right? So it's always collaborative. But yeah, often I'm reaching out to ENTs to say, hey, tell me a little bit more about what you saw in this last exam. Do we think, here's what I'm hearing, because what I'm hearing is often, and they will tell you, what I'm hearing is often more important, sometimes a more important piece of the puzzle than what they're seeing in an exam, because what we see in a laryngoscopic exam is only one piece of the puzzle.
Sure.
And you'd be amazed. Sometimes you can look at chords that look absolutely pristine, but they're not capable of doing the thing that singer needs to be able to do or used to be able to do. And that can be a moment of mystery for everybody involved, going, well, if the chords look fine, right, what's going on here?
Yeah, of course. I had a real life experience like that. So then, how much of singing is a mind game over just technique?
That's a great question. I think I guess it depends on your definition of mind game. It's all a mind game, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Because singing is a motor learning event. It is a neurological event. It is a form of communication. So I'm sure we've all had this experience as artists, when we get a middleman in there who's trying to, wreak havoc a bit, it can really throw us for a loop. When we have a limiting identity as a singer, I see singers every day who I go, if I had your voice, nothing could stop me, right? But they have a view of their own voice. Sorry, pollen is trying to kill me right now. They have a view of their voice as being incredibly either fragile or limited, or, well, is my voice really the one anybody wants to hear? And I'm going, oh my gosh, if I had your voice, I could do anything, right? And so sometimes it's, I've often said to a singer, man, I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. I wish you could hear your voice the way I hear you, because you would never doubt yourself again.
So the confidence, the confidence or potential lack thereof. Yeah, and so
the answer to your question, before we move on, I'm sorry.
Please, no.
I'm finally arriving at really the answer to your question, which is that your identity, your self-belief in what your voice can do, is far, far more real than the voice itself. Has far more weight and reality than what the voice can actually do. Yeah. If you believe that you are a singer with a fragile voice, your voice will be fragile.
Isn't that
if
funny?
You are a singer who believes your voice is invincible, I don't know that it will be invincible, but might
shoot for the moon, land among the stars.
Yes, you will use it. You will use it that way, and hopefully that will serve you well with good technique. But yeah.
Well, let's just also be clear. I would argue, to your point about if you think your voice is invincible, listening to Dorothy Loudon sing 50%, for example, it's not that she's like cooing us to sleep, but there's a confidence in what she is doing in a way that, at least for me, I listen to it and I'm full. I just think it's amazing. And even though she's obviously, and it's to go back to what you said, I don't even want to be pejorative and say working with a limited voice, because what does that mean? She's working with exactly her instrument and was delivering. But so no matter what you've got, if you have the confidence to back it up and you believe in it, we'll go along for the ride. When you work with someone who's doing 8 shows a week, which is many people, what are some of the biggest priorities you have in maintaining their vocal health?
That's a great question. I think it is multidisciplinary. It's making sure, do you have your team formed? And your team is going to look different depending on who you are and what your needs are. The team could be extremely extensive. It could be very small. Your team might be as small as you, your voice teacher, and your ENT, right? It might involve your vocal coach, your SLP, your massage therapist, your acupuncturist, your laryngeal massage person, right? It could be very extensive, right? Depending on what your needs are. But the thing that jumped immediately to mind is, seeing to the state of the artist as a whole, not just what's happening in this small bit of real estate. That's important. But the first thing that jumps to mind, are you getting at least 8 hours of sleep, right? We just had a study on some really robust studies on Olympic athletes that showed that they were in their peak condition, not at 8 hours, but 10 hours. And, I laugh because I go, I don't think anybody on the island of Manhattan is getting 10 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm telling my students about this because it paints, I think so long we've had 7 to 8 hours in our minds as the gold standard. Well, actually, we're now discovering 7 to 8 hours is the bare minimum, right? We want to be living as close to 9 as possible, if not 10. And I'm seeing this consistently in my students. The harder and the more vocal demands the role has, the closer they live towards 9 to 10 hours a night. Generally speaking, if all other things are equal, they're floating through it with much greater ease than if they're getting 7 to 8 hours.
So sleep.
Sleep is incredibly important in a way that we used to kind of only focus on hydration. Are you drinking enough water, right? Of course, that's important. But for me, actually, I think sleep would top the list, followed by hydration, and certainly mental health, right? I see a lot of people who are in great vocal health. They're doing everything they can to stay in their show, but they're not attending to with their spiritual health, their mental health. That's crumbling, right? So it's really, being a performer 8 shows a week is an extraordinarily inspiring thing, really, when you see someone doing it well at the highest levels, because it is such a juggling act. They are keeping so many balls in the air, and it can be a very lonely thing. It doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be, but it can be. And so it really is inspiring when I see people who are managing to find the balance of it all and still live a full life. That is really extraordinary.
I just watched last night the UK Next to Normal, and I was thinking about this with Casey Levy. Just
Oh, I
going
can't
up
wait
my,
to watch it. It's
oh
on
my
it's on my
God.
list.
Well, I'd never seen it. I
Oh.
didn't really know. I mean, of course, I knew General, and I've heard I Missed Mountains, but I didn't really know what it was. And specifically, again, I'm fascinated by huge emotional roles and huge vocal demands, and how those two are married together so seamlessly. And somewhat speaking of that, and the idea of a team. So you've been working with Nicole Scherzinger, who's currently starring in Sunset Boulevard, and I saw you post a couple of weeks ago. I forget what it was. You were in the studio with her at like 5 a.m. because she was doing a morning show.
Yes.
And so assumedly, you were there as a support to help her maybe warm her up or prep her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, but is that common? Meaning, I think you're just working with her and not necessarily the production vocal coach. But if you are just working with her, what is the dynamic of working with someone who is in such a major spotlight as opposed to those you simply see from time to time?
Yeah. I am actually the vocal coach for the full production, which is nice. That actually helps, because again, it's all about collaboration, and having that title allows me more access to a lot of people across the board. I can talk with the company manager, I can talk with this person, I can talk with that person. I get a lot of perspectives, right? But yeah, it's entirely individual. Those kinds of morning shows, I really wish we wouldn't, expect music theater performers to do, the 11 o'clock number at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Crazy.
It really is wild. And smart producers go, like last week, I think Death Becomes Her made a smart decision. They went, you know what, let's not make these women belt their, 11 o'clock number together. Let's do a number that's a lot more character-based, a lot simpler for them to sing, but will be enjoyable for the audience. And I went, thank you.
And meanwhile, Jennifer Simard said "fuck" at the end of it. She said her.
Did she really?
And if you watch it, she sings her lyric when she says "fuck," and she went.
I love that.
I know.
I'm gonna go, as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna go watch that. I can't wait. But yeah, I love when I love when producers look after their artists.
Yes.
And when they don't make them do a show the day of the Tonys, for example, when they don't, when they go lighter leading up to the Tonys, when they are aware of the toll that a 5-show weekend has, all of that, we really respect that. And I'm seeing more and more producers now who were performers themselves at some point. And
So
I
they get
think
it.
that is starting to really infiltrate the industry in a wonderful way. I hope. I think that's what I'm seeing. Anyway, don't think I answered your question, which is, it's really individual. For Nicole, I think it was on that day, she knew, I'm doing one of the hardest things I've got in the show, and I'm doing it at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I've got a show the night before. We actually, it's amazing how much conversation we had about the game plan that went into that, even weeks in advance. How much sleep should I get the night before? Should I call out of the show before? Should I go, somebody recommended to her, don't go to sleep at all, just stay awake.
I hate that one.
It's a strategy,
yes.
it's a strategy.
Yeah.
I get the logic behind it. Not a great one, I don't think. But what should my morning look like? What time do I need to get up? How much cardio? What condition should I be in when I arrive at the studio? And all of this. And I think for her, it was really just, Mike, if you're willing to be there, it will put me at ease. So it was, we did a lot of warming up, and she was able to do the sound check, and then we were able to then go back and go, okay, so here's what we need a little bit more of in our warm up. We need to go a little further with this, and here's the notes from our sound check that I think you should. And she is such, I have to give her credit. She is, I didn't know what to expect when I began working with a pussycat doll, Joshua. No idea what to expect. I gotta say, the perfect student. Shocking.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know if that's shocking to anybody. It was shocking to me. You tell her something and she's like, I hear you. I value it. I'm going to do my damnedest. Right? She is just one of those. And she'll come back and go, I was listening to our lesson from 3 weeks ago, and I heard you for the first time. I really heard what you said. And wow, my next show, I was able to put that in. It's just, the things that you go, these are conversations I would expect to be having with somebody who's had a whole career in music theater, right?
Sure.
Who really has that kind of like 5-6 shows behind them, and they're thinking on that level. She really has that growth mindset that we're looking for. Anyway, so I think on that day it was more about, can I have my team around me and feel like I have access to all the resources that I have, given this ludicrous thing I'm about to do.
Yeah, well, just to say, I think she's clearly cemented herself as a valuable, important musical theater performer. So for you to, hadn't even really given much thought to the fact that, yeah, she hasn't been doing this forever, and yet here she is, likely about to, we will just knock on wood, but, assumedly so. So then, okay, what are some of the most common challenges that you see in even the most seasoned performers?
Well, I think it is, I use this term growth mindset. I think it really has to do with how much of a growth mindset they have. I have, you'll have, as we see so often on Broadway now, we have what is often called stunt casting, where someone who's never done Broadway before is brought in to a show like Chicago, something like that. And I think most commonly the experience you have is somebody who goes, look, Mike, I've been performing my whole life. I'm fine. I don't even know why they have me in voice lessons. Come on. I'm a performer. I know what to do, right? They're not considering, I mean, I don't know that anyone's ever said that out loud to me, but that's the vibe, right? Is I got this. It's fine. They haven't really considered that they have not done 8 shows a week and what that looks like. They just know that they are a reliable performer in their own right. Right.
Sure.
So how much of a growth mindset do they have? And that's why I felt so incredibly blessed. I didn't know Nicole when she was doing the West End run of Sunset Boulevard, but she came into this Broadway run going, the first lesson, she said, Mike, I cannot have a repeat of what I experienced in the West End. I have to figure out how to do this right.
And by the way,
was
can I talk about
successful.
Well, Mike, what's amazing to me about that, sorry to cut you off, about the
Yeah,
growth
yeah,
mindset thing, is that we all know that when you have sung any piece of music,
yeah.
especially for some period of time, especially so successfully, how challenging it must be to go, okay, I'm going to reconfigure processes or muscles. That's
Hmm.
growth mindset, is it
Yeah,
not?
absolutely. Absolutely. And the desire to want to do that, right? To not just go, well, I won an Olivier Award. I guess what I'm doing is great. So I'll just keep doing it. Even though my voice is telling me it's maybe a little more fatiguing than I'd like it to be, or whatever that might be, right? And so yeah, it was wonderful to see from the get-go that feeling of yeah, I really just want to reinvigorate this. I want to uh, tear it all down and build it back up again and see what I missed along the way. But yeah, for me, it all comes down to growth mindset. How willing is this person to go on that journey? How open are they? The other person who jumps to mind was somebody like Jennifer Nettles, incredible
Yeah.
country singer, and the joy, I can't tell you the joy she has in lessons when you give her a new tool, she's giggling, she's laughing, literally joyous about, oh my gosh, I feel like I can, you're handing me new tools, and this is thrilling because now what I do can be easier, right? But that
Yeah.
isn't always the case. You're working with people who may be resistant to change. They may be they may have a limiting self-belief that, well, change isn't really possible for me. Change would
And
be
I,
great, but it's not possible.
and not to psychoanalyze these people, but where does that come from? Probably likely a place of fear, and
Absolutely.
we know this about this industry as we continue to grow in it. Sometimes things feel more consequential, and so you're less willing to step outside. That's why to hear that about Nicole Scherzinger coming to New York and saying, you know what, I don't want to repeat this as I want to grow here. That just that takes a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
it just takes a lot. Even me at least, who likes to think I work from a place of a growth mindset, you know, ego comes into play, and
Yeah.
you get scared
Yeah.
with things like that.
I mean, I'll
Um,
tell you, because I know she wouldn't mind. We had one session, which this is what I live for. We met together at Dr. Pittman's office, and we had her under scope, and we watched her do some of her singing tasks because she was eager to also get an inside view of what's happening when I do some of these things. And maybe by seeing them, I can create more efficiency.
wow,
Because Mike's, you're explaining to me, but maybe if I saw my own chords, if I saw what's happening in the walls of my pharynx, if I see, maybe that will connect with me in a way. And it sure did. There were things
wow,
that she learned in that session that would have taken, months of talking about. So,
yes.
I mean, that's what I love to see, is somebody who's all in and going, I'm going to use all the resources around me, my MD, my vocal coach, I'm open to sucking it all up, but I also have a great filter for what is not useful to me. Because I've also seen, I'm sure you've seen the other side of the coin, where especially with young performers, there's so many cooks in the
I know.
kitchen, and they're taking in every bit of information, and that's great. God bless them. They're taking in every bit of information. They're a sponge, but then they've taken in conflicting information. They're hearing their one thing from their director, another thing from their MD, and it's all conflicting, and they don't know how to filter it.
Well, this is where it goes back to that question I was asking you about a while ago about your own trajectory and specifically trust building in New York, because that's a huge part of it, isn't it? The
Mm.
trust piece. Somewhat to that point, I'm curious, um, when it comes to balancing essentially honesty and encouragement,
Hmm.
because you are a very positive person. Um, um, and I imagine there have been plenty of times when you've been working with someone who simply, to be honest, just simply isn't competitive. And it's not their fault. It's the
Hmm.
instrument they were born with. And they might, to the point, have goals that are simply unattainable at a level given what they're working with.
Yeah.
How do you balance honesty and encouragement?
Well, the simple answer is that it is not my job to tell somebody whether they are marketable or not. But sadly, many voice teachers think that is part of their job. And I've heard way too many stories of people being told, well, you should just do film and TV, or you should this, you should that. My goodness, I'm not a fortune teller. If Dorothy Loudon walked into my studio tomorrow, she's not going to, but if she did, I wish she
Unfortunately,
would.
honestly, exactly.
Well, scary at this point. Save this for the Halloween episode. But you know, if she walked into my studio tomorrow, yeah, sure, my brain might go, oh wow, this is a this is a Nodesy voice, right? This is a complex. This is a voice that has lived a lifetime, right, and is very unique. And there's a lot of things that it cannot do from a functional standpoint. Is it my job to tell this person that there's no place for them in music theater? No.
That's a great point.
It is my job to encourage them as far down that road and to as much efficiency and function as they can find, given the factors that are present for their voice, right? What is the efficiency and the ease and the artistry that your voice can find? And I'm going to let the industry and life and all of that do the rest for you, you know, because as we've often seen, there have been people that you are the most unlikely stars. You would go that, well, they're, you know, if they were in a BFA program, you might go, well, where's the place for them in music theater? Where are they going to flourish, right?
Jane Connell. I know it's just so weird that I'm thinking about it. I know she's old school too, but like, where are you going to put Jane Connell?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Sorry.
they may have extraordinary contributions to make to our art form that you cannot even imagine.
100%.
And so it is not my job. It really isn't my job. And thank God it isn't my job, because boy, I wouldn't want to be that person. The hardest conversations that I do have to have, because I do not blow smoke. And that's the other thing that I always say as well, is I'm not in the business of, just because you're paying me for my time, I'm not just going to tell you what you want to hear. Because I also had those voice teachers who just, you know, and honestly, I see people who come in and honestly, I don't think that they would verbalize it this way, but what they really want from voice lessons is they want
validation.
They want validation and compliments and encouragement. And I'm here for the encouragement, but I don't blow smoke, and I'm going to tell you, you know, what I'm thinking, because that's what you're paying for.
Okay, I have a nuanced question though.
Great,
how do you pick up on that? Because I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So when someone comes in, what is the what are they giving off that you're going, you know, I can tell that this person, and then if I may, then do you still though challenge them and go, we're going to still work on what we've got, or do you sort of coast with where they're at given what they're looking for?
I would say that I don't coast with that per se. What I'm picking up on very quickly is that, you know, I'm saying to them, let's try this. Let's go down this road. Let's see what happens if we swing the pendulum. You know, I'm a big believer in swinging the pendulum in an extreme degree, and then seeing when we come back to neutral, if we find a new neutral, that kind of work in the studio. And what I see immediately is, A, there isn't the growth mindset. B, they stiffen up. Right? They are not, well, what I'm doing now is what I want to be doing, and I really just want validation for it, right? This is very rare, by the way. Fortunately, I rarely see this. I rarely see this, but I do see it occasionally, right? And truthfully, those people kind of filter themselves out of my studio, because naturally, I'm not the teacher they're going to be looking for. They're looking for a cheerleader, and I think they can find that. But I will be your cheerleader, but I'm going to be challenging you. I think that's what I'm here to do, is to say, what if we go down this road? Now, at the end of the day, you're the artist. It's about the sound you want to make, but I am in the business of efficiency, and where can we find more efficiency for what you're already doing?
100%.
So the hardest conversations that I do have are in terms of what are the hardest conversations that I have with people? I would say are in relation to, you know, unrealistic goals for their voice, perhaps, right? You know, I mean, and again, this is fairly rare, but if somebody comes in and says, well, I want to sing Glitter and Be Gay, and they're a mezzo, well, okay, there are realms in which we can look at that. We could, I suppose we could
Lower it.
transpose it. We could, right. I mean, but those are the hardest conversations when you're going, okay, great. Here's where I'm viewing the strengths and the wheelhouse of your instrument. Are you seeing it the same way?
100%. So, okay, without naming names unless you choose, are there moments that you're particularly proud of when you've helped a client or a student?
I mean, I think that the moments that jump immediately to mind probably have most to do with vocal rehabilitation, because that's where the stakes are the highest.
Yes.
And you may have people who are going, well, I'm never going to perform again, or this function is lost to me. I will never have it back, or whatever that is. And the gratitude and the joy is really, that stays with you, and that's what gets you out of bed in the morning. So those are the moments that jump immediately to mind. But also, apart from vocal rehabilitation, I think the moments that I'm proudest of is when I was able to help someone and guide them in changing their vocal identity. As we talked about earlier, maybe it's somebody who, well, my voice is not capable of 8 shows a week, or my voice doesn't do this, or my voice doesn't do that. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And over the course of time, they discover that their identity has changed, because lesson by lesson, practice session by practice session, they have proved new things to themselves. And bit by bit, that identity changes. And you see the excitement and the confidence start to come back. Maybe they thought there wasn't a place for them in the industry, and now they're clearly seeing, oh, I'm suddenly being called in by Craig Burns over and over for this project. And that never happened before, because now I'm walking in the room with a kind of identity and confidence I didn't have before. Right. So, yeah, that for me is, you can't beat those moments. That's what it's all about.
Is there something, and I promise I won't ask you too many more, even though I nerd out about this, so thank you for all your time.
I'm here for all of it. It's great.
Is there something that you wish more singers understood earlier in their careers?
Yeah, I think it would really come down to, I guess I'm hesitating, because I think this is a lesson that we all learn at a different stage in our lives. So yes, while I wish everybody learned it early, I think other people's journeys are what they are. And you may not learn this till you're 40, and maybe that's the right time for you to learn it. But communication over sound making. When I do a masterclass, 9 times out of 10, the biggest thing, that person gets up and they may sing gorgeously, perhaps, but they're no better than a sound producing robot, right? They have learned to make a string of sounds, and maybe they've learned to make that string of sounds reasonably well, right? But there's no verb happening at any point. There's no communication happening. And ultimately, what I see consistently is that if even great sound making, and I love great singing, but if it isn't connected to a need, to a want, to your humanity, and not just to making a marketable sound, it won't be sustainable, and it won't be healthy over the long run.
And when you, especially with great singers, when you give them that kind of feedback, do they hear that? Does that resonate with them, do you think? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think in my experience, fortunately, no one's ever been offended. I don't think. Yeah. I think there's a way of just guiding someone into, well, let's explore this. Let's try this. Let's go here. And then they immediately start to discover, oh, there's more of a grounding to what this is than what I was doing before. I feel more in my body, perhaps. It might be part of their experience. Or I feel more emotionally connected all of a sudden. or I'm observing that my voice is doing more what I want it to do because it's connected to an actual template, like a verb, right? Our bodies, we've been working with these verbs: to speak, to whine, to cry, to whimper, to call. These are all verbs that we've been using since we were kids. Our bodies have these great, we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
And I think a
Yes.
lot of voice training, particularly for music theater, sadly, is going strictly through the lens of sound making. Josh, can you demonstrate for me your head dominant mix? Now demonstrate for me your chest dominant mix, right? Okay, I think there's a time and a place for that conversation, but hopefully that's nothing near what you're thinking on stage, right?
Of course. Yeah. Let's hope.
Right. Let's hope. And so, I think that is the thing, is sound making versus communication. And I see that at all levels of the game. And it's easy, even for great performers who've known great communicative singing, to fall into that trap here and there.
So then what does excite you the most right now about where musical theater and voice work are headed?
I am most excited about the confluence and the interdisciplinary aspect of what's happening right now in voice training. We're seeing all of this research happening in very disparate fields: neuroscience, motor learning, actual biomechanics of the voice. I mean, believe it or not, in 2025, we still cannot prove what creates vibrato. Would you believe that? We have very good theories, one of which is very likely the truth, but we can't prove it. And so, there's still mysteries about the voice, and that's very exciting. There are still mysteries, many mysteries, in fact, that we go like, we think this, but we don't know, right? And so we have so many different disparate fields who are exploring their, speech therapy, so many different fields. And when they come together and they collaborate and we get this interdisciplinary look at the voice, that's what really excites me, because it's new tools for all of us. It's new understandings for all of us. Now, from the standpoint of what's happening in the industry, in music theater, what excites me most, I think, is that we're starting to see, I think it's always been there, but we're starting to see even more of it, a real hybrid of blending and blurring the lines of what a play versus a musical can be. Look at Dead Outlaw. It's funny. I had a friend the other day who saw it, and he's like, yeah, it was he didn't particularly care for it, which surprised me. But his reasoning was, it felt like a play with music, and I was like, yes, that's actually what excited me about it. Was I'm interested in that blurring of the lines between both, right? And so that's exciting to me. I think we're seeing a lot more of that, and we're also seeing. I don't know. The pessimistic side of me sees the money of Broadway and goes, oh, well, we're still putting, schlock up there that's, just financially oriented, and it's about turning a buck and how many tourists can we pack in and this and that. But I am seeing producers taking risks on things like maybe Happy Ending, taking risks on Dead Outlaw, taking risks because they believe in the piece. And I want to encourage that and highlight that and lift that up, because that's what we need more of. And so I find all of that very exciting.
What is one very famous singer, dead or alive, that you'd love to work with, and why?
Unsurprisingly, Barbra Streisand jumps to mind. And the reason why is that, having also listened to her, 900 hours of her autobiography. How many hours was that? I'm like, Babs, if you talk about Dusty Rhodes one more time, I'm turning this off. But what I mean by that is that her relationship to voice training was really very much of its time. I think she tried to get in with voice teachers at a period of time when nobody was training what we now call CCM training well, which is not Conservatory of Cincinnati. It's contemporary commercial music, which is music theater, rock, pop, MT. All of that is under the umbrella of CCM singing. contemporary music, basically. And so she had some early, and she describes these in her book, early sort of brushes with voice teachers that were negative. And they were, somebody going, well, no, you can't sing the word like that. You have to do it like this. And she went, I'm not going to do it like that. I'm going to do it like me, right? Because that's who she is. And I think her voice has aged quite well. But I think one of the things that I hear her say quite often is that people go, well, what do you sing around the house? And she goes, I never sing. She says, in fact, I will go years without singing, which does not speak well to conditioning of the voice. Many people would assume, well, then, the less you use the voice, the more pristine it will be.
Oh,
no.
Yeah.
It's like any muscle in the body. Conditioning is incredibly important. In fact, even when somebody has a vocal hemorrhage, we don't like to think of them going more than 7 days without making a sound. There needs to be a period of time when there's no sound for the healing, but we don't want people to go too long without singing. And so she's somebody who always jumps to mind. I think, boy, it really would have been fun to work with her through her 40s, 50s, 60s. I wonder what the longevity could have been like, even though she's still singing, she's still performing. The other person who jumps immediately to mind, because I was just heartbroken by her documentary with Celine Dion. I think talk about somebody who it would be both an emotional journey as well as a fascinating journey to be part of her rehabilitative team and really look at meeting you here and now where you are today with your voice, what can we get from it? What is the efficiency and the function that you can have?
Yeah, that documentary and watching her then sing at the Olympics was amazing.
Yeah.
We end every episode with, I didn't tell you this, but what we call comfort food performances, which is basically like a favorite performance that we could come back to time and time again, or just one that we love, as I like to do it. And so I'll kick us off. Yeah. And I'll just throw it up and say, Dorothy Loudon, 50%.
I'm picking up that you might be a Dorothy Loudon fan, and you might enjoy
gosh. Oh, Billy Goldenberg. I do love that show, and I do love that song. And
that is actually the only time I've ever said no to a performer is I think she must have been like 16-year-old kid got up at the Broadway Theater Project and was like, and I'm going to sing 50%. And I was like, no, you're not.
I won't iron his shirt. She's like, what are you talking about?
And the only time I will say no.
I will say, though, I think I was probably the only person when I saw, I think it's up there too, B. Arthur, Just Between Friends.
Yeah.
When she goes, I'm going to sing a song 50%. And it was actually written by the amazing Billy Goldenberg, who was on, and I get emotional thinking about it because he was her accompanist. I loved that show. And I remember I was such a fan. And I was probably the only person, and maybe me and two other people in the audience knew how special it was that he was up there. But what's your comfort food performance?
Two jump to mind, and they're both women, which is strange because I'm sure there's a great one that jumps to mind for a male voice. But the first one that jumps to mind is just go to YouTube and put in Streisand, Garland, Bewitched.
Okay.
Barbra Streisand performing a song that I don't particularly care for. I've never particularly connected with or liked the song Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered from Pal Joey.
Yeah.
It's never really spoken to me. Go watch her performance of it. It actually makes me weep, and I don't know why. Don't know why. But
I'm excited.
It's black and white, and nobody knew who she was. It was just before Funny Girl. And it was it's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. And then the other one from the opera realm that I always come back to, is Beverly Sills singing the Willow Song from Ballad of Baby Doe. Yes. Both black and white performances. I don't know why that would be, but go watch them both. They are, in their own ways, just masterful.
Okay, that's good. Those are good. I'm excited for those. Well,
this is what my associates and I do when we get together. We're like, everybody bring a video, right?
yeah. A vocal example, so to speak.
Yeah, and also we look at both. I'll tell them often, bring one that is incredibly inspiring to you for whatever reason, and then bring one that we can talk about from a technique standpoint, like maybe something where you were like, this person's struggling and why, and what would you do?
I think that combo sort of sums up, much of this conversation.
Yeah.
And I would argue, obviously what is such extreme efficacy for so many people you're working with. And I appreciate you being so open with your thoughts and
Thank you, friend.
It's been great. So thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate it.
I knew this would be a lot of fun because you're a lot of fun. So thank you.